Please welcome to Moment and Story. Here you'll find story that inspire, touch the heart, and reflect the beauty of everyday life. The Old Man and the Empty Bench. There is a bench in the park near my home that seems to listen. It rests beneath an oak with a trunk creased like an old palm reading the future, and the canopy spreads so wide that sunlight arrives there in pieces, broken by leaves into quiet coins. Pigeons patrol the gravel like small inspectors, and the lake beyond performs a slow, tireless breathing, wind across water, water against stones, stones holding their ancient silence. The bench is ordinary to anyone walking past, a wooden back, iron arms cooled by shade, but the wood remembers. If you press your palm to the slats, you can feel the day moving through it, the warmth saved from noon, the cooling drift of late afternoon, the buttery glow that waits for evening. I did not notice it at first. The park makes many invitations, jogging paths etched like figure eights, a playground that clinks and laughs, a field that hosts frisbees and picnics when the weather allows. In a place that generous, a bench is just a bench until something teaches you otherwise. The teacher, in this case, was an old man who arrived every afternoon with the faithfulness of a tolling bell. He would come from the north path, the one lined with birch trees that peel their own bark like notes torn from a notebook. A cane clicked quietly in his right hand. Tucked beneath his left arm, a folded newspaper, the day's news compressed to the size of a book you might keep by a bedside. His hair had thinned to a silver frost and lay obediently against his skull. His jacket was always tidy, even when the weather didn't require it, and he wore a hat with a crease like a river ripple. He chose the same square of space each time. He lowered himself as though asking permission, the way you might settle beside a sleeping cat, careful not to startle the habits the bench had formed with its own stillness. He would open the paper and read a single column, sometimes two, then let the pages slacken in his lap and drift to the lake. His face did not announce a mood. It was a harbor with many boats, some returning, some leaving, some simply anchored and rocking to the smallest waves. It is possible to learn the choreography of a stranger the way you learn the weather in a place, what happens when the clouds gather, how shadows point at certain hours. I learned the rhythm of his visits. I learned that he exchanged a nod with the groundskeeper but never a word. I learned that he removed his hat when a funeral procession of geese crossed the path and that he smiled at dogs regardless of breed, as if all dogs shared a memory with him. And I learned that the bench, the ordinary bench, mattered to him with a private gravity. Curiosity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a small itch that grows by behaving. Mine grew. One day, pretending to check messages, I watched him longer than I meant to and found myself embarrassed when his eyes lifted and met mine. There was no accusation there. Only a quiet friendliness, the kind you use to greet a neighbor whose name you have not yet learned. I was the one who looked away. The weeks made their casual procession. A summer of ripe figs and powdered sidewalks dimmed into a late summer of dusty light, then into the first cool mouthfuls of autumn. On a day when the clouds arranged themselves like books on a shelf, I decided to ask, "Mind if I sit?" I said, standing near enough to be heard and far enough to retreat with dignity if he preferred solitude. He tapped the slat beside him. "Benches are built for more than one," he said, the words wearing a smile before his mouth caught up. I sat. I listened to the watery hush. He finished a paragraph and folded the page neatly, as if closing a small gate that would still swing freely when opened again. "This bench remembers," he said, unprompted, as if resuming a conversation the wood and he had been having all year. "Remembers?" I asked. "My wife and I," he said. "We made a habit of this view." He gestured with his hat toward the lake. Sunlight fell through the oak and scattered in the water like rosary beads dropped and rolling. On Sundays at first, then on any day that pretended to be Sunday. His voice had the calm of someone who has rehearsed certain sentences, not because he wants to perform them, but because the muscles of the words know how to hold him upright. "What was her name?" I asked. He looked delighted and startled, like a man offered his favorite dessert without having asked for it. "Mara," he said, with a soft weight on the first syllable. Short for Amara. Long for a breath. I learned then that he believed objects keep company with us even when we forget how to keep company with ourselves. The wood knew the heat of their shoulders. The iron arms had memorized the curve of her elbow. The lake had learned how to copy them, and the oak had practiced saying their names in leaf speech every time it moved. "She passed," he said, after a pause that carried the dignity of a curtain lowering, 5 years ago. He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at the lake as if reading from a page he could see there. "You prepare, and still you don't." "I'm sorry," I said, "because the world offers few tools that are both honest and small enough to hold in one hand." He nodded. "I come here because the place knows who we were. I don't come to meet ghosts. I come to be remembered alongside her." He placed his palm flat on the bench, a gentle pledge. The wood can hold a little of what the heart cannot carry all at once. We sat through a long pocket of quiet. Children laughed in the distance the way rain rattles far off before it arrives. A bicycle chain hiccuped and recovered. He exhaled in a slow ribbon. "Do you think love lasts?" I asked, my voice cautious not to startle the day. "It's the only thing built to," he said. "Everything else is scaffolding." When evening began to darken the surface of the lake, he patted the bench with the politeness you use saying goodbye to a host. "Take care of her," he whispered to the wood, and then, to me, "Take care of yourself." He rose with the awkward dignity of a ship departing dock and walked the birch-lined path, cane ticking time. I remained. The bench felt less like a seat and more like a threshold I had been allowed to cross. I became a regular without meaning to. The way someone becomes a regular at a cafe because the light is forgiving there and the chairs forgive back. I chose times that felt like his times. On some days I saw him from a distance and decided not to interrupt the quiet triangle of old man, bench, and lake. On others, I joined him, and he accepted me with the cordiality of an old train conductor tearing a ticket. "What do you do when you aren't sitting with trees?" he asked once. "I do many small things badly and a few things passably," I said. "I'm learning to keep plants alive." "Ah," he said, pleased. "The most honest apprenticeship. Plants forgive slowly, and therefore we remember the lesson." My Mara used to greet the spider plants by name. She said politeness increases photosynthesis. He shared dates in no particular order, like a pocket full of coins poured onto a table. First meeting at a bus stop where they both missed the same bus because they were watching a stray dog cross the street. A honeymoon that dissolved into rain and laughter in a tiny seaside room whose windows refused to close. A small argument about curtains that lasted a surprising 4 days and ended with an apology note slipped into a sleeve. The everydayness of everything. The miracle inside the mundane. Did you ever write her letters? I asked. Letters? He seemed amused. We left notes everywhere. In the sugar jar. Inside the dictionary. On a shoe. We wrote when we were present as much as when we were absent. Do you still keep any? I ventured. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a paper so thin it looked like a moth's wing. He unfolded it with both hands, as if removing a veil. In aged looping handwriting, remember to look up. Beneath it, a quick sketch of a sky with 2 uneven clouds and a small bird drawn like a cursive V. She tucked this into my wallet one summer, he said. I have tried to honor it ever since. The bench gained a new detail for me on a morning rinsed with early light. I arrived before him and traced the wood with idle fingers, the way you do with a table as you wait for a friend in a cafe. Beneath the third slat, near the iron arm, I felt shallow grooves, ununiform, stubborn against the pads of my fingers. I leaned closer. There, where years of weather had paled the bench to the color of bread crust, were letters faint as a dried river, M.A., and between them, a small heart that time had pared down to a leaf shape. I did not know if they belonged to him and Mara. The park has hosted many alphabets. But when he arrived and I showed him, his face made a complicated journey, surprise tumbling into tenderness, and tenderness into something quieter that I could not name. We never carved them, he said. We were always too polite to the world. Then he chuckled. But perhaps someone carved them on our behalf. That is a thought worth keeping. He took off his hat and brushed a leaf from the bench, an unnecessary gesture performed with ceremony. Names want to be held, he added. Spoken, written, carved, sung, names are the pockets we keep each other in. That afternoon, the park was a dictionary of sounds, the slow spell of water, the crispy grammar of gravel, the distant commas of children's laughter. He spoke of the months after Mara's diagnosis. How the world shrank to the width of waiting rooms and the height of clipboards. How friends came bearing soups and apologies, as if nourishment could be an apology and apology could be nourishment. How Mara insisted on beauty with stubborn good humor. She said, if I have to sit in a gray chair attached to a slow drip, then you must bring me color. Bring me oranges. Bring me the shawl my sister hates and I love. Bring me books with outrageous covers. Bring me all the small mercies you can smuggle past the nurses. Did you? I asked. I became a smuggler, he said, with pride. Once I carried a pocket full of sea glass. When the light struck it, the room turned into a shallow green ocean. We sailed there for half an hour. He went quiet then, not with pain but with the kind of fullness that needs rearranging. The lake offered its patient mirror. A dog barked 3 times. Somewhere a child announced, "Watch me." To a universe that, for once, seemed to watch, did the bench matter then? I asked, nodding toward the wood. It was the place where we could say nothing and it counted, he said. That is what a good place does. It counts your silence as speech. The year turned the page where paragraphs shorten and exclamation points fall like leaves. Autumn taught the park a new accent. The oak spent its gold with the extravagance of a benefactor who knows he cannot take any of it with him. The lake traded its summer glitter for a moody pewter. The air edited itself with clarity, what remained was crisp and understandable. He learned my name without asking for it. One afternoon, Between a story of a dishwasher that had required 3 repairmen and a memory of a cat that answered only to whistling, he said, "Tell me, Jonah," and I did not ask how he knew. Names travel across benches the way shade does. Do you come here for the same reasons I do? He asked. I think I come here to remember who I am when nothing is loud, I said. Ah, he nodded. You come to listen to yourself and call it the lake. On a day that failed to properly become afternoon, the sky wrapped us in a cotton gray. He wore a scarf so old its threads had their own stories. He offered one of them without prompting. Mara used to say that weather is a language. Some days the sky whispers things even our dearest friends don't dare say. Some days it scolds us for forgetting umbrellas. Some days it hands us permission to change plans. What is it saying now? I asked. He considered the softness above us. Today it says, carry what you must, but carry lightly. Your pockets are deep, don't fill them with stones. A wind came down the path and rearranged the oak's hair. The bench gave the smallest creak, the way a house does to let you know it is alive. Did you ever want to move away? I asked. From this town, I mean. He smiled. We thought of it once. We had a map spread on the kitchen table, and everything was possible. Then the kettle boiled. We drank tea. We moved the map aside to set down our cups. Later, when we lifted it again, the table had left a ring on the paper over this town. A brown halo. It felt like an answer. We stayed. Sometimes he asked about my life, the way a lamp asks a room to speak by being on. He learned about my unreliable pothose and my tendency to buy notebooks I never filled because their blankness felt too ceremonial. He learned that I had loved once and that it had ended the way a garden ends when you forget to water it for 2 seasons in a row, not out of malice, but neglect. He did not offer advice. He offered the bench back to me with his quiet company. Listening is a kind of gift that spends itself and returns richer, he said. You don't owe me a story. But if telling it lightens your pockets, then tell it. I told him some of it. Not all. Enough to leave, as he would say, room for air to move between the words. We watched a heron stand as still as grammar and then spear the water with a precision that felt like punctuation. When rain finally introduced itself, it did so politely, and we decided to accept the invitation to be damp. He removed his hat and let the drops stipple his scalp. Mara loved the first honest rain after a dry spell, he said. She said everything drinks then, soil, sidewalks, even sadness. The bench acquired the clean smell of wet wood. The lake put on the glassy skin rain gives it, a sheen that makes you think of varnished violins. The afternoon grew a little darker, not in mood but in hue, the way a watercolor deepens with a second wash. Tell me about your cane, I said. After a while, he lifted it and turned it in his hands. The wood was honey brown, the handle worn to the exact shape of his grip. I didn't need it until I did, he said. It was Mara's last gift. She had a way of convincing objects to become allies. Lean on something, she told me, so you can keep leaning toward the world. He tapped it twice on the stones and set it back down, the sound a small metronome. It isn't the walking it helps, he added. It's the remembering to walk. Winter flirted with us and then committed. The oak held its lacework to the sky, bare and intricate, a cathedral roof without a ceiling. The bench, in its insistence on staying, gathered a coat of frost some mornings that cracked delicately beneath us when we sat. The lake wore a hard, thoughtful face. Ducks pushed it open with their chests like librarians nudging a heavy door. He dressed in layers that spoke to different decades, an old sweater whose elbows were shy, a coat with a collar that had learned his neck. He still brought the folded newspaper, though now he used it mostly as a lap blanket for his fingers. I used to think grand moments defined a life, he said, exhaling smoke you could see even though he did not smoke. Weddings, births, promotions, trips requiring passports. But in the end it was Tuesday afternoons that left the clearest map. The store clerk who learned your name. The neighbor who returned your trash bin to its proper side of the driveway without being asked. The way soup tastes better on a day it doesn't need to. Did you and Mara travel much? I asked. We once planned a grand tour, he said. We managed a small one. The best part was the train between two forgettable towns. Mara slept against my shoulder, and a child across the aisle kept showing me a sticker book. Outside, fields arranged themselves in shy rectangles. I've never felt so wealthy. He told me about the day they bought their first couch and how it made the room decide to be a room. About the neighbor who baked bread on Fridays and always delivered the loaf with the promise, it's best eaten with butter and kindness. About the basil plant that refused to grow for him and then erupted into leaves after Mara named it Basilio and said good morning to it for a week straight. Mara insisted that nothing is indifferent, he said. She could be wrong about practical matters, but she was almost never wrong about attention. Do you have children? I asked, gently, unsure if I was opening a door that should remain closed in winter. We wanted them. He said. The world had other plans. We ended up with a row of houseplants and friendships that behaved like family. We became the aunt and uncle who arrived early to set out chairs and left late after washing the last plate. It was a good job. The wind used our cheeks for notes. We learned its music. He described a tradition he and Mara had invented, the first warm day picnic. Instead of waiting for a calendar to declare a season, they listened for the day a bird tried a new song and the ground agreed to be sat upon without complaint. They would pack foolish things, raspberries, a sharp cheese, ginger cookies that snapped with sincerity, and they would sit on the grass near the bench and tell each other small hopes for the next 100 days. Small hopes are the only kind worth keeping, he said. Big hopes are scaffolding again. Necessary, yes. But the small ones teach you how to live while you wait. He looked at my hands. Your plants? Alive, I said. Barely, but honestly. He smiled. That is how many of us are. The winter deepened and then considered softening. A crocus made a brave mistake and then corrected it. We sat in coats one size too large, the lake rehearsing for light. Do you ever talk to her here? I asked. He thought about the oak, considered the lake, included the bench with a glance. Sometimes I bring her the news, he said. Not the newspaper's news. The news about the neighbor's new puppy and the baker's new recipe and the ridiculous hat I saw on a bus. I know she can't use the information, but telling her makes it feel used, somehow. And does she answer? She answers by leaving room for me to go on, he said. That was always her finest reply. Time forgot to move quickly, then remembered and sprinted. The calendar flipped itself with both boredom and zeal, as calendars do. Our visits developed the uneven grace of weather. Some days we sat for a quarter of an hour and felt it full. Some days an hour folded itself around us like a coat you don't remember putting on. He arrived one afternoon wearing an expression like a door that has been knocked upon very gently. Bad news? I asked, because the bench permits questions that the rest of the world considers nosy. My neighbor moved, he said. The one who watered my plants when I was lazy or away. She left me her rubber plant. I accepted it as if it were an heirloom. Rubber plants are stubborn, I said. They punish overwatering by performing drama. Mara would have given it a stern talk, he said. I tried to replicate her tone. The plant seemed unimpressed. We laughed. The oak laughed in leaf. The lake laughed by catching a gust wrong and pretending not to mind. He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a small, egg-smooth stone the color of stormlight. Found this by the water yesterday, he said, balancing it on his palm. We used to collect one from each Sunday we spent here. A pocket museum. They live in a ceramic bowl on my kitchen table, marbles the earth forgot to finish, each with its own moon patterns. May I? I asked, and he placed the stone in my hand. It was colder than I expected, denser, a fragment of seriousness. You kept count? We tried, he said. But some Sundays were hidden inside Thursdays, and we took stones then, too. The collection got confused in holidays and griefs. I've decided not to categorize it. The bowl is a map without a legend. That feels truer. He told me of a thunderstorm that trapped them under the oak. How the two of them felt like small guests inside a giant's drum. How they counted seconds between lightning and thunder and invented a game where each second stood for a city they would never visit. How they cheered for 5-second distances as if cheering for a team that did not know it had fans. What about your first visit to this bench? I asked. He laughed softly. We were mad at each other for reasons that have since retired. We sat far apart. I crossed my arms. She crossed hers. The lake crossed nothing and continued being a lake. After 20 minutes, a child offered us each a daisy. We folded. We laughed. We moved closer on this very wood and decided to learn how to argue in ways that did not require so much bad theater. Did you succeed? Sometimes, he said. We learned to say, I am not your enemy, even when the dishes were stacked like little walls and the calendar had no empty squares. That sentence saved us from more foolishness than I can list. A boy on a scooter ricocheted past and offered us a salute with 2 fingers. The sun counterfeited summer for a few minutes. He took off his hat and let his hair feel remembered by warmth. I keep forgetting she isn't new to the world anymore, he said quietly. When I pass a shop window with a dress that is exactly Mara, my body lifts like it intends to open the door, and I have to remind it what has already been decided. We let that sentence sit. It did not require a cushion. It knew how to carry its own weight. What is the hardest part? I asked, because the bench allowed for questions that might be clumsy elsewhere. The small efficiencies, he said. Setting only one place at dinner. Buying half the oranges. Folding laundry that contains no argument about where the socks go. Grief is heavy, yes. But it is also efficient, and I do not care for that. We watched a dog teaching its owner how to throw a better stick. The lake put on sunglasses for a while. The oak practiced a new whisper. You can set 2 places sometimes, I said. I do, he nodded. On Sundays. Habit is a kind of faith, I think. Spring rehearsed green until it remembered all the lines. The park turned vivid. The bench tasted warmth again through its grain. The air smelled like new pencils and cut grass and possibility. And then he stopped arriving. Absence is the kind of teacher that leaves you to do all the work. The first day I noticed his missing, I invented excuses on his behalf, a late bus, a doctor with terrible timing, a nap that won the argument. The second day I walked the birchline path, half expecting to find him in debate with a squirrel. The third day I sat anyway, because benches believe in continuity even when we do not. The fourth day I brought a notebook without lines and wrote down everything the park said, in case the park wanted a stenographer. I felt both foolish and precise. I pressed my palm against the bench as he did and said, "Take care of her," though my voice quivered toward the end. A week became 2, and then the shape of absence stopped being a shape and became a climate. I considered asking the groundskeeper. I considered placing a note where the newspaper usually rested. Instead, I watered the space with attention. I arrived. I sat. I learned the afternoon's new grammar. A teenage couple negotiated the terms of a promise on the grass. An elderly woman fed crumbs to a duck with a limp. The oak unveiled its tenderest leaves with a shyness that felt like kindness. On a day when the sky wore blue like a brand new shirt, a woman paused near the bench. She was carrying a small bouquet of clover and a sadness that did not announce itself with noise. "May I?" she asked, indicating the space beside me. "Please," I said, shifting to make additional room though the bench had plenty. She sat with a carefulness that matched his carefulness. Her hair was the color of wheat at its most sincere. She placed the clover on her knee, then on the bench between us, as if offering it back to the wood. "You knew him," she said after a while, not as a question. "I did," I replied, and my voice discovered a raw spot. "He was my neighbor," she said. "He watered my lavender when I was away and returned my mail bundled by a ribbon he kept for that purpose. He used to hum to the hydrangeas." We managed smiles. "He passed 10 days ago," she added, each word a small, folded thing. Not unexpectedly. But still. We sat with the sentence. We watched it choose a place among the stones. A duck negotiated with the lake to be allowed more of it. The oak accepted a breeze and improved it. "He told me about Mara," I said. "I think he told everyone who would listen," she said. "He told the postman, the woman at the bakery, the man who tunes the park's piano on festival days. He told the absence, and in telling it, he turned some of it into presence again. That was his trick." She placed the clover gently beneath the small carved M.A. as if completing an equation. "He will be missed," she said. "And not missed, too. Because he left the kind of pieces that know how to find each other." We did not define the pieces. We did not look for a list. We allowed the bench to hold what we could not enumerate. After she left, I stayed, the way you stay after a concert to hear the room take a breath. I put my hand on the wood where his had often rested and felt the day moving through it. A little heat, a little shade, a little music from the lake, I'll take care of her, I said to the bench. And you take care of us? The bench did not answer, not in any language I could translate, and yet I understood. On a Sunday that had the courtesy to be quiet, I decided to walk past the Old Man Street. I had no address, only a direction: North Path, Birches, the bus stop where the light shone sideways in late afternoon. I wasn't hunting grief, I was following a thread. The houses there wore their chores openly, brooms leaned by doors, watering cans sunning themselves, shoes airing on porches like patient boats. His building stood slightly back from the sidewalk, a modest brick rectangle softened by window boxes. Someone had tucked rosemary and mint into the soil as though flavor should greet you before anything else. The doorbell panel held names written by different hands. His name remained, black ink steady, A. Delaney. I did not press the button. I only touched the brass plate with one finger, the way you test a skillet to see if it's ready. A neighbor appeared as if the building had heard me wondering. "You came from the park," she said. It wasn't a question. She held a bundle of letters with rubber bands crossing them like stitches. "I sit where he used to sit," I said. "You and half the town," she replied, kind and dry at once. "Would you like to come up?" He left something for the bench crowd. Her name was Evelyn, the wheat-haired woman with the clover. We climbed a narrow stairwell perfumed faintly with soap and bread, the two smells that have most to recommend them. His door had already learned how to be closed. Inside, the apartment carried a plainness that welcomed attention rather than competing with it. A ceramic bowl on the table held a museum of stones, gray moons, green commas, river-warmed punctuation. A rubber plant supervised from the corner, newly proud. "He always said leave things simple so the living can find them," Evelyn murmured. She crossed to a bookshelf that had taken pains not to sag. From behind a small framed drawing of the lake, pencil lines soft, the oak suggested with loving economy, she slipped a letter sealed with a sliver of gold sticker. "To whoever keeps the bench company," the envelope said in a neat hand. "Would you," she began, but I had already lifted it the way you lift a small bird fallen from a nest. We sat at his table. The letter opened with the sound of a secret remembering its manners. "If you are reading this, then I am either late for the bench or permanently early for some other appointment. I leave no instructions. Instructions are what to do with appliances, not with love. But I thought you might like a story or two that belongs to the place we shared." His words walked without hurrying. He wrote about the day he first saw Mara at the bus stop, how the dog that delayed them wore an expression of business and they laughed at the same moment, and in that instant he understood that laughter could be choreography. He described their first winter in a small apartment with a radiator that sang. He wrote that the bench taught him a posture, not slumped with sorrow, not stiff with pride, but something in between, a readiness to meet what comes without flinching. "If anyone asks what the bench is for, you may tell them it is for learning how to set down a bag without losing what's inside. Also, the carved MA is not ours. But we used to touch it like a doorbell before we sat." He signed it simply, A. There was no flourish, no postscript with jokes. Instead, a longer blank space after his name, as if he had stepped away from the line and wanted the silence to dry properly. I read it aloud to Evelyn. "We allowed the room to keep some of the words, we kept the rest. Would you take it?" she asked, after a while. "To the bench? Or keep it the way one keeps a candle and bring its light when needed?" I'll bring it, I said. And when the bench needs fire, I'll bring it again. We walked back together, neighbors in the sense that the same place had now chosen to include us. At the bench, she rested her hand on the wood, the oak shadow stippling her skin. She tucked a sprig of rosemary into a crack in the slats, herb and timber exchanging a brief green handshake. For remembrance, she said. And for soup. We sat and let his letter breathe. A boy with skinned knees practiced bravery by not crying when he fell. A pair of elders debated the ethics of feeding squirrels. The lake explained itself to the wind and then allowed the wind to disagree. Before we left, I slid the letter into a slim envelope I had brought and placed it under the bench, taped to the underside with the discreet care of a stagehand. The bench had no pocket, we fashioned one. The letter was there if anyone asked for proof. It was there if no one did. I started bringing a pencil case and a fat notebook with a cover like an old suitcase. I drew lines that made no picture and words that made no argument. I wrote signs and folded them small, free listening. Tell me something true about rain. What does your grandmother keep in her handbag? If you could name this bench, what would you call it? I kept the papers in my pocket and offered them the way a street magician offers a card trick, with a little flourish and no pressure. People chose sometimes. They told the bench about migraines and babies and job interviews and the horror of losing a library card. They confessed to breaking a mug and keeping the handle as a relic. They admitted they had never learned to whistle. The bench held their stories like a coat rack holds coats, some puffy with weather, some thin as excuses, each one a shape of the person who'd brought it. A teen with headphones perched around his neck said his father had moved 2 states away and the silence in the car afterward was like chewing bread without water. He sat with me until the silence learned how to be something else, then left a sticker under the slat, a tiny lightning bolt. A woman in her 30s told me she was afraid she had a good life and would fail to notice it in time. She and her wife spread out a small picnic of mandarins and almonds as if rehearsing gratitude could be a meal. They left behind a mandarin peel in the shape of a question mark, which the wind later edited. An elderly gentleman with a tie the color of faithful sky described a chess opponent he'd played every week in the next town over until last month, when the man stopped coming. He said he missed losing. He tapped the iron arm of the bench as you might tap a rook, and I imagined the bench making tactical suggestions. Soon the bench acquired a reputation. A violinist practiced here in the late light, offering the slow spill of Bach to anyone who had had a day with corners. A nurse ate her dinner on the far end and told us that the hardest part was remembering not just the names but the nicknames, because nicknames open people like windows. A child held up a worm found in rain-soft gravel and named it Hector with the ceremony deserving of heroes. We began a small ritual on Thursdays, the bowl of Sundays. Evelyn brought a ceramic bowl, green with a crackle glaze, and placed a stone from his collection inside. Each week, anyone who wished could bring a stone from anywhere, the lake, a walk, a pocket, and add it. We told the stone where it came from, and in doing so told ourselves where we had been. You would think rocks would not be good at listening, but they excel. Do we need permission? Someone asked. The first day. The bench is the permission, Evelyn said, with a certainty that made sense only because it did. I kept a ledger no one asked for. Not names, the bench disapproved of registers. Just marks. A tally of the way the bench turned strangers into almosts and almosts into neighbors. When a boy learned to ride his bike without hands. I drew a little bicycle. When an old friend returned after years away and cried quietly to the lake, I drew a small wave. When a woman placed a plastic ring on her partner's finger and called it a rehearsal, I drew 2 circles with a tiny gap between them. Because we still had time for the real thing, people asked me about the carved initials. I told them the truth we had. They did not belong to the old man and Mara, but they had been adopted. We touched them before sitting. We understood that belonging is sometimes simply attention that has lasted. One Thursday, a municipal worker in a neon vest approached carrying a clipboard like a shield. "I've had reports," he said, not hostile. Merely satisfied to have something to report. People gathering. Stones being curated. The bench being used. Evelyn nodded. The bench is being used in the manner for which benches are invented, she said. Sitting, listening, remembering, occasional sandwiching. He scribbled and then, with a surprising twinkle, asked if he could place a stone. From his pocket he produced a flat oval he'd found in the lot behind the maintenance shed. Ordinary, perfect. He whispered, "For my mother," and set it in the bowl. The bowl made room. It was inevitable that a dog would enroll itself in our proceedings. This one arrived with a democracy of attention. Every face was equal, every offering considered. She was medium everything, size, color, wag. Someone suggested hazel, someone else toast. The dog accepted both, which is one way to answer to life. She had a torn ear and one white paw dipped like a brush. When she discovered that the bench represented a reliable source of compliments, she made it a station on her rounds. She'd trot up, present one profile, then the other, then sit with the theatrical patience of a child waiting for cake. The oak let down a leaf as a medal. A little boy declared himself her campaign manager. "We're running on a platform of snacks," he told us. One afternoon, Toast Hazel leaped onto the bench with a confidence that made us laugh and then grew quiet. She sniffed the carved M.A. and placed her paw on the heart between the letters. A hush went through the small gathered crowd, which is a ridiculous sentence to write about a dog and nevertheless exactly what happened. We applauded. She bowed, or scratched an itch, we assigned it meaning. The bench accepted the paw print the way a kitchen accepts a new mug, delighted by the ordinary miracle of another cup. It was Evelyn's idea to give the bench a plaque. "Nothing official," she said. "Officialdom has its own rhythm. We'll use twine. And hope." She brought a small brass rectangle engraved by a shop that also does pet tags and trophies. We attached it to the back of the bench with twine we had persuaded not to fray. It swung slightly, like a pendant resting against a chest. A city inspector walked by and pretended not to see it. An hour later he returned with a smile like a permit and helped us tie it tighter. Children began to read it aloud. Lovers read it into each other's hair. A man who had avoided saying his wife's name since the funeral spoke it quietly and then sat down as if his legs had just remembered their duty. A woman in running gear stopped, took a breath, and texted a photo of the plaque to someone who surely needed it. A man I had never seen before, in a suit that had conformed to his shoulders over years of trying, approached holding a plastic bag with 2 pastries he clearly meant to eat alone. He touched the plaque and laughed once, the short bright kind. "I proposed here," he said, "to no one and everyone." She said, "Can we sit first?" and then said yes. He set one pastry on the bench. We watched the flaky top lift in the wind and then settle, as if agreeing with the world. The bench had become a minor landmark without seeking it. I worried for a minute that attention might curdle into spectacle, that phones might replace eyes, that we'd end up narrating instead of noticing. But the park itself corrected us. The lake keeps secrets. The oak remembers how to make shade that invites rather than consumes. The bench knows how to be ordinary, which is a discipline of its own. I took to walking the long way home as if it mattered how my shoes learned the neighborhood. Streets reveal themselves slowly to pedestrians. They are frank with cars and intimate with walkers. I learned where the cat napped in a window that faced the afternoon sun. I learned which stoop collected conversations like a theater collects echoes. I learned the shortcut that wasn't shorter but past a bakery that spoke cinnamon at 6 every evening. On one such walk, I saw a woman balancing a chair on her hip, the way you might carry a child who insists on being carried. Her front gate had given up latching and now preferred to gossip with the sidewalk. I offered to help with the chair and somehow ended up in a small parade, chair, potted fern, a framed print of a whale dreaming of clouds. We arranged the furniture in a living room that knew how to make strangers feel well placed. She gave me a glass of water and a look in which suspicion and gratitude had agreed to share a table. "I'm Nora," she said. "The chair belongs to my grandmother. It refuses to be comfortable unless it approves of the company." "The bench near the lake is like that," I said, and realized I had become the sort of person who compares furniture to other furniture with a straight face. We walked back to the bench together without planning to. The sunlight came through the oak in long strips, as if reminding us that hours still have their own order. Nora listened as I told the story of the old man and the empty bench that had stopped being empty. She asked good questions, the kind that nudge a story into a better posture. "Did he ever talk about being afraid?" she asked, after I had described the note in the wallet, the sea glass in the clinic, the bowl of sundaes. "He was afraid of efficiency," I said. "He thought grief streamlines life in a way that makes us forget to dither, and he admired dithering. He was afraid of the day he would forget the sound of her laugh, and then discovered laughter is less a sound than a shape. He was afraid of the first time he would pass their shop window and not stop. He admitted all of this without shame. It made courage easier, hearing fear spoken that way." We sat while the park changed shifts. Joggers traded the path to strollers. The playground handed the evening back to the lake. Toast Hazel performed a circuit of greetings and then found a patch of clover that demanded supervision. We took the long way again when we left, Nora and I, and the streets presented small gifts. A porch band rehearsing poorly but with gladness, a child announcing to anyone that her tooth had finally wiggled free, the smell of garlic rising from a kitchen that understood time. When we parted, she said, "I'll bring a stone on Thursday," in the tone of someone accepting homework and looking forward to it. I went to sleep that night with the bench in my mind like a page you keep open on a table because you know you'll be right back. It was inevitable, too, that someone would attempt to name the bench. Humans name things to bless them, to hold them still, to remember their entrances and exits. A child suggested Seat of Secrets. A teenager proposed the listening post, which made the veterans nod. A poet argued for the ordinary throne. An older woman, delighted by understatement, voted for the bench. We wrote our suggestions on paper leaves cut from green construction paper and hung them in the oak like improbable fruit. The tree wore our whims without complaint, then fanned them into motion. We pretended the rustling was a kind of vote tally. At sunset, Evelyn climbed carefully onto the bench, inspector approved, and announced that the oak had rendered a verdict. The bench will remain itself, she said. Names are welcome as nicknames, to be used as needed. Officially, it will answer to whatever love calls it. We laughed because it felt like a joke, and grew quiet because it felt like a principle. Later, someone tied a ribbon to the twined plaque and it looked dressed, but not ridiculous. That same day, a man with a thin scar along his jaw touched the plaque, then the carved initials, then the bowl of stones. He chose one, a pale gray pebble with a darker speck, as if it had swallowed a crumb of night, and rolled it in his palm. My partner and I came here to decide, he said. We sat on the far left because decisions are less terrifying if you lean on the armrest. We decided to try again. We tried. It didn't work. We still come here. It still works. A girl with braided hair brought a notebook full of horses and asked if benches have birthdays. She proposed using the day the plaque was tied as a birthday. We agreed on the grounds that birthdays are more useful than anniversaries for things that learn. We sang quietly, badly, and the bench survived our music with grace. Nora began showing up with a thermos and 2 cups. We discovered that tea tastes more like tea if you pour it under a tree. She taught me the names of clouds, not the Latin ones but the ones people use when they point: feather, spill, blanket, traveler. I taught her how to tell wind direction by what it does to the lake. We practiced being useful in ways no one had demanded. Someone suggested a paper lantern night. We invited the park without flyers. News travels on foot better than on paper. On the chosen evening, the path lit in small stubborn circles. Children carried lanterns like captured moons. We wrote wishes we would not be judged for. Call my father. Take the new job. Forgive her, even if she doesn't ask. Learn to whistle. We hung them on the oak. The bench wore our light like an idea. A police officer on her rounds paused and asked why the tree had become a modest constellation. Evelyn told the story in 4 sentences that made the officer's posture change from formality to friendship. She attached her station's challenge coin to the twine for the night and said, "For service," and everyone nodded, because that was accurate for once. By the time summer practiced again, the bench had taught me a shape of living. Not a philosophy, too stiff. Not a habit, too small. A shape. Like the curve of a shoulder leaning to make space for another shoulder. Like a shoreline, where water and land persist in their separate natures and still manage a conversation that lasts forever. On a morning that smelled faintly of mint from the window boxes, I found Toast Hazel asleep under the bench, one paw across her nose, the twined plaque tapping a slow hollow rhythm above her. Children in bright shoes zoomed past like punctuation marks, and the lake wore its most generous glitter. I sat, and the bench accepted me with the confidence of an old friend who doesn't require apology for time away. Nora arrived with her thermos and a bag of cherries. We ate them with the exact concentration cherries demand. Our fingers stained. We offered the stems to the tree, a thin ceremony. She placed a stone in the bowl, not from the lake but from far away, red as a thought you finally speak. From my grandmother's garden, she said. She used to tell me that love is a promise that learns to walk. It's clumsy at first. It trips. But if you keep feeding it, eventually it knows where to put its feet. We sat with that. It felt like a new plank added to a bridge we had been crossing all year without the language to say what kept us up. I thought of the old man's cane, lean on something so you can keep leaning toward the world. I thought of the letter behind the frame, patient as a candle. I thought of the carved M.A., not theirs, but ours somehow, an alphabet that had learned to include strangers. A young couple approached, shy and electric, carrying a small box. They asked if it would be all right to sit in the middle. And the bench made room. He opened the box and the ring inside was simple but so bright it startled a bird. She covered her mouth and nodded without choreography, then said, "Let's sit first," which made the entire bench community look up at the same sky, because sometimes stories fold time like paper. They sat. They cried. We applauded gently, as you do when a baby sleeps in the next room. Later, they placed the ring back in the box and went to tell the rest of the world, leaving behind 2 cherries and a scrap of their joy that the wood knew how to keep. Evenings arrived with the honesty of light leaving. The oak learned a lower song. The lake took off its sequins and put on its soft wool. I walked Nora home using the long route, because being late to your own apartment is one of the few respectable tardinesses. We passed the shop window where the old man said his body still lifted. I stopped and looked anyway. The dress in the window was not exactly Mara, because there is no exactly, but it was something like the idea of her. I saw our reflections beside it, shapes blurred into companionship. I did not feel the old fear that lives in efficiency. I felt the long practice of pausing, the shape the bench had carved into me. Do you think love lasts? I asked, though I knew the answer, and perhaps because I wanted to hear it spoken in another new voice. It changes shoes, Nora said. But yes. It keeps walking, even when we sit down. We returned to the bench for the last light. Evelyn arrived with rosemary and twine, an instinctive combination. The municipal worker came without clipboard and brought a tiny flag for the bowl, white, with a hand-drawn oak leaf. The violinist tuned to the sound of a duck's complaint and then gave us music that felt like a window opening in a room we'd thought had no more windows. I placed my palm against the wood, feeling the warmth the day had stored like a secret it intended to share. I thought of the first afternoon I had sat near the old man, awkward and curious, the questions crowding my pockets. I thought of the way he patted the bench as if it were an old friend, which it was, and said, "Take care of her." I understood now that he meant the bench, yes, and also the world, and also love. We spoke his name together. Not loudly, names prefer courtesy. We said, Mara, too, because it doesn't matter that the carved letters were not theirs. Love never insisted on strict authorship. The oak received the names and returned them to us in leaf speech. The lake translated them into small, unending light. Toast Hazel, half asleep, thumped her tail exactly once, which is the dog's way of signing a document. When it grew dark enough that the lanterns made excuses for sticking around, we took them out again and lit a few, not a spectacle, just enough to remember how wishes look when they are thin and brave. We hung them low, within reach of short arms and tired adults. A child read the plaque and asked why it doesn't say for sadness. Because sadness is already clever at finding us, Evelyn said. This is for what stays. We walked home in pairs and pockets of one. The bench remained, unguarded, like trust. The bowl of stones considered the moon. The plaque nodded against the back slat. The oak tucked itself in without closing its eyes, in bed, with the window open to let in the kind of night that minds its own business. I understood something I had been practicing without knowing. Love lasts not by standing still but by making room, on benches, in bowls, in days. It lasts by letting others touch the places it once called private, and discovering privacy isn't the opposite of sharing. It's the ground where sharing grows. The next morning, the park would make its ordinary invitations. The bench would be itself. People would place their small, particular stones in the bowl and their small, particular hopes in the air. Some of those hopes would learn to walk. Some would sit beside us and breathe, and when I pass that bench now, I pause. I place my hand gently on the worn slats, the way you touch a shoulder you trust, and I whisper a promise into the air that no longer needs to be reminded but likes to hear it anyway. Love lasts.